So first of all, I'd like to thank you for being here today, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference for accepting my paper. Today I will talk about the representation literature of border-crossing female protagonists, which leads to a subversion of spatial representation in the works. The text I will study challenge dominant conceptualizations of borders, gender, and genre, leading us to evaluate narrative and poetic constructions of the nation of history. By anchoring female protagonists in profoundly defamiliarized spaces, and by assigning them a transgressive function through their geographical border crossing, the text progressively engender a failure of realism and an interrogation of traditional historiographic discourses. Thus, through the presence of female characters who exist in an unstable world, it is actually the Western male mode of representing, defining, bordering, and controlling space that is being subverted. In other words, the representation of female migrants in literature engenders necessarily a subversion of spatial representation. The works which will set the foundation for this study are all written by women and have all come out in the last 20 years. Karen Tay Yamashita's Tropic of Orange in 1997, Kathy Park Hong's Dance Dance Revolution in 2007, and Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11 in 2014. I'm going to recap very quickly those three works for those of you who don't know necessarily much about them. Tropic of Orange is a novel set in Los Angeles and Mexico, told through the perspective of 7 interrelated characters along the course of 7 days. A car accident on the Harbor Three-Way has engendered an apocalyptic standstill and the creation of a new social order by the homeless population moving into the abandoned cars. Rafaela Cortez, a Mexican-American woman, has left LA for a house near Mazatlan, Mexico. This place, situated right on the Tropic of Cancer, is the first site of anomalies that create a ripple effect, starting with an orange that falls from its tree and is carried across the US-Mexico border, bringing along with it the Tropic of Cancer. This results in a distortion of time and space of which LA becomes the epicenter. Set in 2016, the poem sequence Dance Dance Revolution takes place in a fictional city called the Desert. 2 voices alternate: the historian, gender unknown, who writes standard English and visits the desert as a tourist, and the guide, a South Korean revolutionary woman who fled to the desert, made her way from housekeeper to tour guide, and speaks in the trademark desert language, itself a fluid idiom based on English grammatical structures, but culling its vocabulary and pronunciation from over 300 languages and dialects. The novel Station 11 follows Kirsten Raymond, an actress in a traveling symphony, which performs Shakespearean plays in the settlements on the Great Lakes shores, some 20 years after the collapse of all civilizations due to a worldwide outbreak of a deadly virus. Kirsten has little to no memory of a world with electricity, running water, and the internet. The only thing she has retained from it is a graphic novel, Station 11, gifted to her by a famous actor, Arthur Leander. All 3 books follow similar patterns of frame stories and non-linear narratives that challenge the Western male mode of representing space. This mode can be said to have been inherited from the Western conception of nature and geography. Its origins may be partly found in the popular misreading of Descartes' Discourse and Method in 1637. In the 6th part, he talked about the need to, I quote, make ourselves the masters and possessors added word of nature. This ethos of the master has found resonance in concurrent Western patriarchal systems of power and colonial enterprises. As Gillian Rose and Alison Blunt pointed out in their introduction to Writing Women in Space, I quote, spaces are constituted through struggles over power and knowledge, meaning gendered and racial power differentials inevitably come to bear on the construction of these spaces. In particular, mapping and cartography in Western imperialism, predicated on the illusion of mimesis, have been used as a tool for power. The act of claiming a territory for oneself and asserting one's dominance over it is predicated over delineating it, ascribing it borders, and naming it. It has to be noted, though, that the male nationalistic ethos is also found in anti-colonial movements, where the discourses against imperial powers often remain androcentric, viewing women's liberation movements as either the result of a corrupted Western influence or subordinated to class and national independence struggles. As Elaine H. Kim and Chung Choi stated in their introduction to Dangerous Women, Gender and Korean Nationalism, I quote, the nationalist position of the male elite did not separate women from nation and emphasize enlightenment for women only as mothers. The 3 works here actively disrupt these hegemonic representations operating as a dominant normative discourse. And by doing so, the texts confirm Kim and Choi's statement that, I quote, The radicalization of women as revolutionary subject does not emerge from desexualized motherhood, but from the experience of migration from home and community as colonized women. In each work, the female protagonists experience a form of displacement. They are exiled, nomads, refugees, workers crossing national borders. All are displaced into the public transnational space, thus complicating both the assignation of women to the private domestic sphere and the relegation of women to a domestic national space defined along the mother-motherland line. Kirsten Raymond, for example, travels within a space that has been stripped of all borders, where only isolated settlements remain as concentrations of human activity, enclaves of humanity within a world overtaken by the forest. In Dance Dance Revolution, the guide's migration is politically motivated. She was part of the Gwangju uprising in 1980 against the autocratic military regime. 3 years later, she moved to the desert as a refugee, but constantly feels estranged from the place where she happens to be located. I quote, "I'm a double migrant, ceded from Koryo, ceded from Merikka." Even in the desert, she keeps crossing borders, albeit metaphorical ones. She moves from hotel to hotel. In the desert, hotels are actually miniature replicas of cities. So by moving between the Paris, Belgrade, and St. Petersburg hotels, the guide replicates a transnational dynamic, albeit a parody of one. The parodic effect complicates any univocal discourse on transnationalism. As for Rafaela Cortés, she has crossed several times the border between the US and Mexico. At first, this has an economic motivation. The free trade market drives her north. Her trek back to Mexico, where her son, Sol, is tied to a sense of alienation with her marriage, and she only heads northward again to find and save Sol. The return to the motherland is thus seemingly associated with the search of a form of wholeness, but even that is precarious. Furthermore, Rafaela is tied to the Tropic of Cancer as its metaphorical mother, but that line is the most unstable of all. It will literally move, changing the continent with it and precipitating a redrawing of geography. It would then be reductive to see this transnationality as a mere disruption of national borders. The worlds these women inhabit are characterized by a fundamental instability. They have been profoundly defamiliarized, rendered other, and do not neatly coincide with our own frame of reference, embodying Foucault's concept of heterotopia. The world of Station 11 is marked by the collapse of spatial markers. Geopolitical borders have been completely erased, exposing their artificial nature and highlighting how nation-states are constructed against dominant institutional representations that strive to naturalize the origins of a nation-state, so as to better assert sovereignty and power over whomever is residing within those borders. Moreover, since electricity has disappeared, cars and airplanes can no longer be used. Thus, the contraction of space that had been initiated by globalization, making communication and transportation much easier and faster, has been undone. A sense of distance has been restored. The geography is shedding or submerging its human outgrowths, giving the impression of reverting to a primeval pre-colonial wilderness. But this is only an illusion, as the myth of the pre-contact pristine virgin land is mostly a European fantasized construct. In Dance Dance Revolution, the desert is a fictional space, a planned city reminiscent of Las Vegas or Dubai. A literal utopia with dystopian accents, it contracts space by modeling hotels and entire cities, thus reproducing a semblance of diversity while still maintaining the artificiality of boundaries. In Tropic of Orange, both the urban space of LA and the more rural and mythical space of Mazatlan are also rendered unfamiliar. The name of Mazatlan harkens back to the mythical place of Aztlan, the birthplace of the Aztec peoples. As such, it is an attempt to materialize origin myths on Earth against the delineated geography of Western colonial powers. On the other hand, LA is not represented as a unified, coherent urban space, but one that is highly fragmented, of which we only get partial perspectives. This estrangement of traditional representation further extends to the level of genre and subjectivity, which in turn contributes to indicate a failure of realism as a traditional mode of representation. This is first enacted by the appropriation of heroic and epic tropes, usually associated with male roles. The post-apocalyptic hero, Kirsten, the revolutionary leader, the guide, the fighter, Rafaela, who ends up transforming into a serpent, reminiscent of the Quetzalcoatl, to fight the leader of the smuggling ring that sends infant organs across the border to the US. Moreover, the construction of the self of these characters is systematically considered in terms of relationality, against the trope of the lone self-made hero. The text also disrupts traditional genre divisions, leading us to evaluate expectations about such modes as science fiction, ethnic fiction, epic poetry, and so on. Fragmenting subjectivity points to a greater crisis of representation of the self as a unified, coherent whole, and thus disrupts the nation's self-continuum, where the representation of the nation is predicated on the stability of a definition of the self. This stems from an interrogation of the Enlightenment inherited notions of progress, conquest, and civilization, as well as definition of the individual. This also leads to reevaluation of traditional historiographic discourses. Dance revolution and tropical forage destabilize the authority usually ascribed to historiography. The historian in dance revolution asserts history has always been stingy to me. The very object of research is thus elusive, reticent. More generally, the construction of the guides itself as revolutionary and exiled is tied to unstable national formations. There's South Korea, which endured successive waves of colonization, as well as a geographical and national rupture in the 20th century, and the city of the desert, whose cosmopolitanism belies social and political repression. In tropical forage, the presence of magical realism and the fragmentation of subjectivity prevent any univocal historical discourse of this geographical space. Through the dynamics of both motherhood and migration, Rafaela Cortés opposes nativist and colonial discourses and reasserts the power of indigenous and syncretic articulations of the land, which draw mythical and generational histories against the Western historiographical narratives. These migrant women thus embody a dynamic that foregrounds both indigenous and transnational elements, leading to rupture in the nation's self-continuum as it eludes the binary of nativism and globalization. By transgressing national borders and by being situated within heterotropic, unstable spaces, the female subject magnifies the failure of realism, of traditional historiographic discourses, and of dominant sites of power in the face of modernity. The experience of displacement, be it migration, nomadism, or exile, within a space that eludes any attempts at neat bordering and defining, radicalizes the female subject and magnifies its disruptive potential in the